This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
All right, who's ready to cook? I sure am. Friday, baby. My favorite podcast of the week. And you all know what the Friday show is here on the FSWR channel. It's classic review time. I just looked up at the Word document from yesterday and realized, holy crap, we're already in the month of February? Yeah, January just flew by. As it turns out, February is going to be the same deal, because that's the shortest month of the year. Before you know it, we'll be reaching the busiest month of the year for wrestling. Of course, for me, I'll just be reviewing 2 nights of WrestleMania. For all the other fans out there that try to watch like 40 different products all at once, good luck to you. I ain't got that kind of patience. So make sure y'all subscribe, comment, and like the show if you've not already. You can find the FSWR channel here on Rumble and YouTube on Mondays and Fridays. We are the wrestling podcast nobody knows, but everybody needs. Everyone needs their weekly depository of classic wrestling, whether you like it or not. And if not, you can just not watch the classic reviews. But we have a lot to discuss today with all 3 of our programs. So let's get going here with the Saturday TBS episode from WCW. And we actually had a special guest commentator joining Jim Ross at the podium this week. There was 0 mention of Tony Schiavone's whereabouts. He just wasn't there this week for whatever reason. I actually had to double check just to make sure. I was like, wait, he didn't already leave for the WWF, right? No, apparently he doesn't sign with Vince for another couple months. I just found it odd that they said nothing about his absence. At least with David Crockett, we would get the occasional he's on assignment alibi. They didn't even give Tony that. They just blew him off entirely. But with Tony being absent from the picture this week, they brought Magnum TA in to, I guess you could call him the color commentator. He apparently decided to play twin dress-up with Jim Ross this week, because they were both basically wearing the exact same suits with matching ties. Dark navy suits, yellow ties, with black polka dots. It's obviously a shout out to Big Dust on the other channel. So they open up with Eddie Gilbert coming over for an interview. And remember last week they shot the big TV angle where Eddie had his face smashed into the concrete floor by the Horsemen. So he comes out to the booth with a big strip of tape over the bridge of his nose. I did kind of find it weird that the doctors would have let Eddie show up here at the studio only 1 week after he was diagnosed with a concussion and a broken nose. That was according to Ricky Steamboat at the end of last week's program. So Eddie does a little fiery babyface speech. Says that if Flair and Wyndham wanted to put Gilbert and Steamboat out for good, they should have started by digging a deep grave and burying the dirt on top of them. But whether it's a broken neck, a broken jaw, even a broken nose, nothing is going to stop Eddie from coming back to get his revenge. And Flair and Wyndham better start praying that they even make it to the Chi-Town Rumble in February. Because hot stuff is hot on their trail. I thought the promo was fine. Had a little bit of Ricky Morton flair to it. Not to directly compare Eddie Gilbert to Ricky Morton, because they were two entirely different talents. But, hey, they're trying to make a new babyface star out of this white meat, good-looking young lion. Is it getting over with the audience? Well, that's another conversation entirely. Coming out of that, we go to the ring for Kevin Sullivan and Dr. Death versus George South and Bob Emery. I know I say this like every week I review a Steve Williams match, but it stood out here, so I have to reiterate my talking point. This guy was massive. Absolutely fucking ginormous. At the point he applied a single leg Boston Crab to George South's knee, and you could actively tell that Steve's entire left arm was bigger than the entire circumference of South's left knee. Let me tell you something. That is a pretty big fucking arm. I think that would about double the length of my knee. And just so you don't think I'm crazy, JR also spoke about Dr. Death's freak strength in this match. So I'm not just a mark. But they worked over South for a while, and then Bob Emery tagged in and proceeded to get decimated for about 5 minutes. They targeted his left arm, wrenched into a series of hammerlocks and mat holds for a while, and after about 4 minutes and 59 seconds of arm wrenching and socket yanking on this poor arm of Bob Emery, guess what the finish was? Kevin Sullivan forcing a submission via hammerlock. I laughed. The entire story to the match was, we're going to work your arm over for a while, and then we're going to beat you with an arm submission. And you know what? If I was Bob Emery, and Dr. Death and Kevin Sullivan are laying this match out for me in the locker room beforehand, you know what I'm not going to try to call for? A comeback. I'm saying, yes, sir, work the arm over, kill me for 5 minutes, and I will submit to the armbar. Just please don't break my neck. And then returning from break, we had Ricky Steamboat at the interview podium to basically promote a workout session that he had planned for later in the program. He, honestly, I kind of blanked out on what he was talking about here. He very dryly stated that he's not the biggest or most imposing force in wrestling, but he's always relied on his quickness and agility to stay one step ahead of his opponents. And not only would he demonstrate that today, but he would also demonstrate that at the Chi-Town Rumble. And if I'm being perfectly blunt, I probably had about 75% more energy than Steamboat did in delivering that promo. Steamboat was many things. A promo savant he was not. And then we had the Fantastics versus Trent Knight and Eddie Sweat. And yes, for those of you wondering, the Fantastics are still around here in 1989. They are fantastically directionless when it comes to their booking. But they're still here to pick up a paycheck and come out to have a good time for all the fans. God, I was so disappointed watching this match. The one opportunity for Magnum TA to make a comment about the Walmart knockoff lookalike Trent Knight, and he didn't seize the moment. Dude, this match was like the prime example of really talented athletes just not understanding the limitations of their opponents. There's a reason why the industry coined the term idiot-proofing your matches, trying to simplify things so that even the lowest of the low totem pole guys could do something with you. God bless Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers. They did not operate under that logic ever. They had their style of match, and damn it, it didn't matter if they were wrestling somebody with the skill of a Bobby Eaton or a Stan Lane, down to the absolute pits of humanity in the form of Eddie Sweat and Trent Knight. The Fantastics were going to work their breakneck pace, flashy babyface style. And if you were in the shoes of Eddie Sweat or Trent Knight, you were fucked. Because the Fantastics were not relaxing their ring style to accommodate. Not only was this match hilariously terrible, it got to a point where midway through, I think even Bobby and Tommy subconsciously knew how bad it was. But now they were just going to expose how unathletic and unskilled Trent Knight and Eddie Sweat were. They're just doing high spots left and right. Knight and Sweat are both getting visibly blown up the longer it goes. Out of position for everything. Never knowing where they were supposed to be next. At one point, they were literally walking during shoot-off spots. They were so exhausted. Like I said, it was so bad. You could actually see Bobby Fulton start to laugh at certain points, knowing fully well that he and Rogers were wrestling the worst job guys of the program at this point. Yeah, they somehow managed to get the collision spot right at the very end, when Rogers and Fulton whipped them into each other. But, yeah, this match did not do anybody any favors. Other than getting a good laugh out of all the smart fans that realized how fucking bad it was. You know, I'm actually kind of glad the Fantastics didn't modify their style to accommodate these two idiots. Because then it just would have been a boring match. At least this was train wreck level bad. And that's the kind of stuff we look for on this program. Hideously awful matches that make us laugh. We need more of them. Alright, so then we had a total what the fuck WCW moment. It is funny because I was well aware this was coming up. Yet even seeing it in real time again, I was still baffled by the setup to this. So, okay, let me just try to break this down to the best of my abilities, because as you'll see as I'm going over the timeline here, the whole thing makes absolutely no fucking sense. Wyndham and Flair are at the interview podium with JR. There's no JJ Dillon. Much like the whole Tony Schiavone thing, they just ghosted him for the conversation entirely. Now, the real reason being that JJ had left the company by this point. He went to the WWF, so they couldn't really bring up his name now that he signed with the opposition. So much for that Butch Reed pairing, right? That went absolutely nowhere after 1 week. So instead, in JJ's place, it's Hiro Matsuda. And I still, after all these years, don't even really understand the whole context of the story. Apparently, he bought Flair and Wyndham's contracts from JJ for some kind of multi-million or seven-figure lump sum. But he basically owns their contracts now in storyline. And now they apparently explained this on one of the early Saturday tapings, but didn't really bother to elaborate on it here for whatever reason. All I know is they spent about 15 seconds doing a horrible explanation to follow up on the Matsuda thing. Then Barry Windham started talking about Lex Luger. He's going to be next in line for a U.S. title shot, which basically came out of nowhere. And then Flair talked about the beauty of Japanese women. He said that Steamboat knows all too well about Japanese culture. And apparently Matsuda was Flair's meal ticket to guarantee victory at the Chi-Town Rumble, because he would learn the ins and outs of what Steamboat was going to do offensively. Now, again, I tried to provide as much detail as I could based on the information they provided here. This was basically an AEW story explanation where they just expect the audience to know what the fuck is happening. Random managers appearing with top talent for no discernible reason. Never bothering to really explain why certain people are aligned together. They just show up on camera and they're like, yeah, so these people are attached to the hip now. Here's what I do know. It's another temporary story that doesn't go anywhere because Barry's basically gone by the end of the month. Like, once he drops the belt to Luger, I'm pretty sure that's it for Barry Windham for a while. So, when you think about it, they kind of made Matsuda look like an idiot in this storyline. Like, wasting 7 figures to buy out Wyndham's contract, literally so he could just leave the promotion by the end of the month anyway. Oh, and by the way, just for all you history buffs out there that forgot about this, because I sure didn't. The last time we saw Hiro Matsuda appear on NWA television, do you remember what happened? He was seen choking out Johnny Weaver as they were building to Dusty versus Luger at Starrcade 87. Pretty sure Matsuda was still a babyface at that point. So now he randomly shows back up here in 1989 as a heel, aligned with the Horsemen. Yeah, I don't get it. Don't get it. After all these years. You know what else I don't get after all these years? Why the fuck they brought Abdullah the Butcher back in 1989? He showed up at the tail end of 88 with Gary Hart, had like 2 televised squash matches, disappeared for weeks. Is this the first time we're actually seeing him since post-Starrcade? At least when he was first here, he was doing things like chewing the interview podium or licking Gary Hart's head just to be weird. You know, under this new Turner regime, Abby was lucky he would get away with sticking his finger inside the job guys' mouths. This is the lamest fucking Abby squash I think I've ever seen. dumped the guy out to the floor one time, spent about 45 minutes putting him in a nerve hold. Then he just hit his corkscrew elbow out of the corner and got the 3. I think this guy got off lucky. If this had taken place in November of 88, I think Abby might have pulled a knife on him. So, yeah, that was more or less a waste of 5 minutes. And then we had the best segment of all time. Rick Steiner in his scheduled TV title match. And they made sure to set this jobber up for failure from right out of the gate. I'm convinced this was a rib. The match is Rick Steiner versus Pretty Boy Lloyd. Now, I want you all to stop and think about this for a minute. First of all, have the words pretty and Lloyd ever been used in the same sentence? Second, do you even know anybody in your life with the name Lloyd? If so, they were probably born before the year 1948. I don't believe we've seen Pretty Boy Lloyd wrestle on this program before. I would certainly remember a name like that. It's always my favorite thing to see the job guys take so much pride in their horrible gimmicks. The fact that they actually come out with custom ring gear with the initials printed somewhere on the fabric. The visual of PBL stamped on the ass of Lloyd's ring pants. That is when you knew Steiner was about to beat the shit out of this guy. So he just absolutely wrecks this idiot. Throws him around for a while, making him look like a human toddler. At one point, he teased he was going to German suplex Tommy Young because, well, why not? Beating on Pretty Boy Lloyd was getting fairly boring. I think Steiner wanted to spice it up a little bit. But instead, he opted to let go, and then he put Lloyd away with a belly-to-belly. And I know I say it all the time, man, but it is absolutely mind-boggling to go back and look at how massively over Rick Steiner was here in early '89. Like, it's nuts. Nobody ever talks about how over Rick Steiner was during this period. And look, I understand that plans change. I understand that because of the constant fluctuation with bookers around this time, you throw in the fact that Jim Herd was a huge mark for the muscly guys like Luger and Sting. It was going to be really hard for Rick Steiner to be viewed as a tippy-top guy, especially to be considered a world title contender at some point. God, they really missed the boat. I still don't think he was quite ready for that big win at Starrcade 88, contrary to what you might hear from the experts. But if they would have spent like all of this year and maybe some of next year trying to elevate Steiner as a main eventer, I think you could argue he had a better case at being a better world champion than Sting. Or at least in terms of getting that rub. And again, I know Flair specifically wanted to drop the belt to Sting. It was a conscious decision on his part as he was part of the booking committee at the time. But man. I mean, it's hard to deny how popular Steiner was in comparison to even Sting by this period. Yeah, but then again, there's a laundry list of what could have been when it comes to top guys who should have been world champion but didn't end up winning the belt. And people have been making those kinds of lists for 25 to 30 years. I still don't think Steiner gets enough attention, though. So then we had the Varsity Club at the booth for a promo. Mike Rotunda did another one of his promos where he called Rick Steiner stupid and said he'd win his TV title back. And Kevin Sullivan ranted about the Road Warriors. Said that he and Dr. Death don't fear anything. In fact, this is always a direct quote, Sullivan likes getting beat on. Uh-huh. Well, that's a charming thought to have. Anyway, all I know is Williams eventually interrupted and screamed about how the Road Warriors used to be the big bullies on the block, but now it's the Varsity Club's turn to be the new street thugs. And you want to know what the funny part of this was? Dr. Death was easily the best promo out of all three guys. Sure, he bumbled over himself, but the guy at least sounded passionate and serious. He also didn't suggest that he likes getting beat off on or whatever the fuck Kevin Sullivan just said. Fired up Dr. Death is good. When he has shit to talk about, he can actually cut a halfway decent promo. Keyword is when he has shit to talk about. And then we had Barry and Kendall Windham versus Mike Justice and Rob Wise. It only took him 3 years. Someone finally woke up and said, you know, we have the Windham brothers under contract. Why don't we pair them together and see if they actually have some chemistry as a tag team? Who'd have ever thunk that? Now, to be fair, part of the problem early on was that Kendall Windham was extraordinarily green, and Barry was much more groomed as a singles guy by the time he had started making headway in the NWA. So it was probably good that they kept them apart for a while Kendall was getting a little more experience. But I even said the other week, Kendall was very impressive in his squash match. He's made a decent amount of progress just within the last year. He's put on some size. He's getting a little more comfortable learning how to work and time all of his spots. I think having him work as a heel was helping in that regard too. Now, this wasn't a tag team master clinic or anything like that, but it was all right. Kendall and Barry worked well together. I like the dynamic of the older, more experienced brother bringing along his younger brother and trying to draw him over to the dark side. You know, again, though, it just kind of goes back to what I was talking about with Barry. The fact that he's not really around much longer with the NWA. What exactly was the plan for them as a tag team? Because obviously you could tell they had something in the works. It's hard to tell if maybe they were going to try to initiate Kendall as an honorary Horseman member, but at the very least, you know, you could say that they definitely wanted to go somewhere with them as a tag team. We'll never know. And that led to the Midnight Express versus the Terminators. This is everything that happened. I'm not omitting any part of this segment. They wrestled for approximately 20 seconds. The original Midnights show up on the floor with signs that read, February 20th, Goodbye Midnights. I did jot this down as a sidebar too. Randy Rose was wearing the most ridiculous getup I've ever seen. a spandex singlet with googly eyeglasses. And if you could just picture that visual in your head, on top of the fact that Randy Rose also had a mustache, one may associate that look with the guy that resembled a pedophile. I'm just going to leave it at that. So, yeah, the OG Midnights come out with a sign. They stand there for approximately 15 seconds. Then they vanish. And the Midnights just hit their double flapjack and get the pin. That was it. That was the segment. It was basically exactly what they did last week, except in half the time. They are really not trying to give this feud more attention than absolutely necessary, are they? JC was right. It was deliberate sabotage. Then we came back for a Lex Luger interview. This about sucked. You know the interview is doomed from the start when Luger begins his promo, but then has to clear his throat because it's so dry. He talked about stuff. I didn't even write anything down. He basically called Flair a coward by refusing to put his belt up against Luger one more time. But Luger knows that Ricky Steamboat is a man of honor. So if Steamboat becomes the world champion, at least Luger knows that he'll have a guaranteed title shot down the road. Well, that's kind of a bold statement. A little bit of foreshadowing for the Luger-Steamboat feud. That was a nice touch. But that's all I got out of it. Luger looked absolutely apathetic here. Like, this is one of those clock in, clock out promos. Even his body language read, I'm here to say some stuff and tapping out for the day, brother. Because I don't want to be here. So then we had Ricky Steamboat in his tune-up series of sorts. This was... This is bizarre. Okay. It's a 3-on-1 handicap match. Except not really. He's taking on the team of Bob Cook, Dustin Rhodes, and Rick Diamond. But it's not a traditional handicap situation where Ricky has to fight all three guys at the same time. Instead, they call this an amateur workout session where Steamboat basically has 3 separate grappling matches where he wrestles one of the job guys and the other 2 kind of stand in the corner looking like idiots. I guess pinfalls and submissions were not part of the equation, nor were tags. So, well, they're in there doing their workout session or whatever the hell it was supposed to be. I can't even objectively call it a match because it wasn't. It was Ricky doing boring grappling moves with 3 underneath guys for about 5 minutes. And about halfway through, Ric Flair comes out to stick his nose in the fray. He's getting all bent out of shape that Steamboat's trying to outclass him. He says, give me 3 guys and I'll beat them all in 30 seconds. So, well, then eventually everybody just stops wrestling. And I legitimately mean that. They're doing drop-down leapfrog arm drag spots, and then everybody just stops. They shake hands, and they leave. There's no official bell to sound the end of the match. This was apparently not comprised of rounds. So apparently everybody just got bored. But then they come back from commercial and they show exclusive footage where Flair and Steamboat had actually gone into a brawl during the break. To which I'm like, why the fuck didn't you air that live? So we see Steamboat toss Flair around like a crash dummy, obviously making sure to rip off his shirt, because that's par for the course when it comes to anything involving Flair and street clothes. Always going to get a little cleavage exposure, and or his bare ass, depending on whether it happens on pay-per-view. But that was the payoff. They did a close-up to show Steamboat's chest all bruised and battered because they got into a chopping contest. I still have no earthly clue what the point of that grappling series was. Why couldn't they have just booked a regular handicap match where Steamboat pinned all three of them? I don't know. It was a weird segment. But the angle got over. Still getting over the idea that Flair's lost his mind. Steamboat is living rent-free inside this guy's head. And it gets better with every passing week just because of the fact that Flair never gets one over on Steamboat. He's right. Just like he talked about earlier in his promo. Steamboat is training to be one step ahead the entire way. So they led us back to the podium where JR was interviewing the Road Warriors. I had like one thing to say about this whole promo segment, but it is well worth the discussion. So the Road Warriors are obviously wearing the giant spike shoulder pads. They have this great camera shot where JR is trying to hold the mic out in front of Hawk so he can talk. At the same time, you see JR attempting to not get a spike in his eye every time Hawk jerks his shoulder to the left or to the right. It's also great because, well, Hawk is the one cutting the promo. So anytime he says something questionable or weird, you see JR's eyes get all big or start shifting and looking in both directions. Like, what the fuck did this guy just say? This was all well worth it just to see the visual of JR standing behind Hawk, trying to avoid having his eye taken out for realsies. I also noted that Paul Ellering was dressed like Sherlock Holmes. For what reason? I couldn't tell you. But he definitely had the undercover agent look going on this week. Then we had Butch Reed versus Jerry Price. I guess one thing I failed to mention about Hiro Matsuda, in addition to him buying Wyndham and Flair's contracts, he also supposedly bought Hacksaw Reed's contract too. So they literally just tried to replace JJ here with Matsuda. Like he was a interchangeable video game character. Just plug him right into that spot. So weird. Reed did some old school butt whooping, some Southern style trash talking, and he eventually won with a shoulder block, followed by a diving clothesline for the 3. That was followed with the Stinger coming out for an interview. And he basically told Butchery to come out and shit talk the Stinger. Because, for those of you wondering, those two are supposed to wrestle at the Chi-Town Rumble on the 20th. Sting is basically out here saying, I'm giving you an open invitation to show up and say something to my face because I'm trying to find a motivation to even want to wrestle you in the first place. Now, those weren't his exact words, but that essentially was the point he was making. And I'm not even entirely disputing it. It would be kind of nice to maybe see these two actually confront one another at some point. I mean, if people are supposed to buy tickets to want to see these guys fight, shouldn't there be an actual story reason for them fighting? Seems like common sense to me, but what the fuck would I know? Then we had the Road Warriors beating Mike Jackson and Kip Montana. Kip Montana. Enough said. Still not as funny as Pretty Boy Lloyd. But I just imagine thinking about all the possible ring names to settle on. Something badass. Something that stands out from the pack. Kip Montana. I assure you, there is nothing remotely badass about having the name Kip. Kip is not a badass name. Sorry. If anyone has the misfortune of knowing anybody named Kip. But it was pretty short and sweet. Road Warriors beat up both guys and pinned Montana with an assisted clothesline / spine buster. It is very weird to watch a Road Warriors match go longer than 30 seconds. But I also have to remember, new regime. You know, Hurt obviously didn't get the appeal of the Road Warriors. The fact that all their matches should be kept as short as humanly possible. Because they're the fucking Road Warriors. But no, they're just out there wrestling like every other standard studio squash. Nothing special about them anymore. We had Dick Murdoch versus Mike Thor. I'm pretty sure I fell asleep watching this match. All I remembered is that Murdoch at one point was laying with Thor in a headlock on the mat. I left the room for about a minute to refill my water tumbler. When I came back, Murdoch was still laying on Thor in the exact same position with this headlock. So I basically tuned it out until Murdoch fired up and hit Thor with a brainbuster. He did at one point hit a standing drop kick. Even Jim Ross was impressed by it. He told us to document that moment as a first. But yeah, that was pretty much it for that segment. And then we had the Midnight's promo. And the very first thing I wrote down here, not even skipping a beat, what the fuck was Stan Lane wearing here? Bobby's out there in a pink polo and slacks, looking totally normal and casual. Fucking Stan's got an orange wife beater, blue jeans, ridiculous purple shades, and to top it off, a long beige-colored trench coat. He looked absurdly preposterous. Like, I can't even call him a hipster because this wasn't even fashionable. This was just, I can't even describe it. It made absolutely no sense. It made Cornette's outfit look normal by comparison. And Cornette's entire gimmick was to wear mismatched outfits. So Corny did an Untouchables knockoff shtick where he was using his radio voice to talk about Paulie Dangerously in the OG Midnights. He at one point said that Paulie would not be floating up the river. He would be in a cement overcoat floating in the river. Sounds like a vague threat. Perfectly suited for national cable television. And in fact, he doubled down on that talking point when he said Paul would meet the same fate as evil men like Al Capone, Hitler, and Ted Bundy. It was the same stuff they've been doing with the Midnights versus Midnights feud from the beginning. Setting up a stipulation for the pay-per-view that didn't come to fruition. It is a loser leaves town match where the guy that gets pinned has to leave the NWA. Pretty sure that is our first time actually hearing about that stipulation on TV. And as we'll come to learn in the next few weeks, that loser leaves town stip didn't really mean much of anything. Kind of like how the match didn't mean anything. Mike Rotunda wrestled Rick Allen. Rotunda used a lot of tight pulling and rope grabbing to cheat. He worked over Allen's knee for a while, and he went over with a butterfly suplex. Literally all there is to say about it. And then for the TV main event, a 6-man tag with JYD, Michael Hayes, and Sting wrestling Max MacGyver and the Cruel Connection. Now, when they rang the bell to start the match, there was about 5 minutes left in overall runtime. They wasted the first minute with Hayes stalling and basically hot dogging for the camera. I think they wrestled for maybe 3.5 minutes. And by they, I mean, Sting did about 3 minutes worth of wrestling. Hayes worked for about 50 seconds. And Dog barely scraped by with about a solid 10. I think Dog, literally his contributions to this match, a standing headlock, and then he tagged right back out. I'm not complaining. But Hayes hit a DDT for the 3. And then all 3 went over to the interview podium for a very quick promo. Hayes said that he's not Frank Sinatra, but if he wants to get something done, he does it his way. They briefly plugged a 6-man tag with apparently them going up against Tenryu and the Road Warriors, allegedly for the 6-man belts, but I still refuse to believe those belts actually exist. I also refuse to believe that match ever took place until I see evidence of it. Can you imagine the Road Warriors in Tenryu versus JYD, Michael Hayes, and Sting? Whew. Who booked that fucking fiasco? All you need to know here is the very last thing we heard at the studio show this week. From Michael Hayes, direct quote, right from his lips. As he was talking about Tenryu, he said, "Bring him on. I'd love to slap a Jap. Times were different back in the 80s. That's all you could say. Like, not even just the fact that Hayes said it. The people cheered. I absolutely can confirm this would not fly on television in 2025. Referring to a culture of people as Japs. That is a bridge too far in most people's minds. It was a very bizarre end to the show, but now then again, a lot of the show was bizarre. And I think I mentioned it the other week. This entire program right now is carried by Flair and Steamboat. And we've now finally reached the point in 89 where a lot of weird things are just sporadically happening from week to week with little to no explanation. Textbook example this week being all the Hiro Matsuda stuff. But it's not even that. You got this Butch Reed Sting feud where, they keep talking about this match they're going to have at the Chi-Town Rumble. Only really for the first time this week did one of the two combatants come out and actually try to stir some shit up. God, the Midnights versus Midnights feud. I just say it every week, dude. It's dead in the water. It's got no buzz. Especially when you see how they're about to pay that feud off in Chicago. They may as well have just stopped everything cold turkey after Starrcade. Now, I know the next couple weeks of TBS shows are shorter in length. However, next week, we're actually going to be doing the Clash of Champions 5 review instead of talking about the next Saturday edition on Superstars and the Superstation. I don't see it as being a long review because Clash card looks about as enticing as a McDonald's menu. It's a bunch of underneath matches with a 6-man main event that ends in a double DQ. However, it'll be a nice precursor because the following week after that, we have the actual Chi-Town Rumble pay-per-view. And we are most definitely going to review that pay-per-view top to bottom. I believe there's an angle they shoot between Flair and Steamboat on that Clash card. Unless I'm misremembering it, but I'm pretty sure it happens there. So we'll basically have a couple weeks where we won't have a TBS show to review. And to be honest with you, that might be a good thing. Because Lord knows there's a whole lot happening on these shows to begin with. But let's flip over to Midsouth here and talk about the big taping block they booked for this week. Now, for the last couple months, they've been advertising this big TV title tournament where the winner would receive a gold medal and a $10,000 check. And while they never showed us the brackets prior to this taping, they've thrown around some names. But here they actually put together a giant poster board with all the names and who was slated to wrestle whom in the opening rounds. And this is just so 1980s. Everything's written in marker. They've screen capped the check and the gold medal onto the poster board. You could barely make out the handwriting of the 10 guys in the tournament. But Bill Watts basically laid the whole thing out. We have Terry Taylor versus Buddy Landell in the first prelim round. Next week, we were supposed to get Hacksaw Duggan taking on Masayo Ito. but they actually had to remove Duggan from the tournament because of a situation, which we'll talk about in a bit. The following week will be JYD versus Nikolai Volkov. Week 4 will be Jim Neidhart versus Hacksaw Reed. Week 5 will be Magnum TA versus Crusher Darso. Then from there, the series continues with the secondary tournament rounds, the semifinals, and then eventually the finals. They've also got bye rounds sporadically thrown in there, which were drawn via coin flip. 10-man tournaments are kind of tricky to book because they don't really follow a traditional flow of consistent brackets per round. Like, evidently, you're going to need to have a bye round somewhere so that a guy actually advances at a prelim round and has somebody to wrestle later on. Because you don't always wind up with an even amount of wrestlers advancing per round. But on the subject of Duggan, here's the latest scoop on his condition. Now, he was originally slated to be in the tournament. However, he wound up suffering a very serious injury in a coal miner's glove match in Tulsa, Oklahoma against Crusher Darso. And they set this up in the pre-taped interview where Darso's standing there wearing this ridiculously oversized glove with a giant metal brace on the knuckles. He's like intentionally standing there to show it off and try to act all cool in front of the camera. Meanwhile, Watts is going on like a 40-minute spiel about how certain guys invented their own gimmick matches over the years. Dusty Rhodes created the bull rope match. JYD created the dog collar match. Just going on forever while Darso's standing there looking like an idiot. But finally, Darso explains that he's here to show everybody that he beat Duggan at his own game. They told us that they could not show the entire film due to it not being suitable for all audiences. It was a gruesome battle, so they were going to show us the edited highlights. So we go to Tulsa for the closing minutes. Oh, for those unaware, the idea behind a coal miner's glove match is that you have the glove suspended above the ring on a 10-foot pole, and whoever gets possession of the glove gets to use the weapon legally. It is the Vince Russo gimmick wet dream to end all wet dreams. Except it's not Viagra on a pole. Or fucking Buff Bagwell's mother. So Duggan actually gets possession of the glove, and he uses it to hit Darso in the face, causing him to bleed. And he does end up getting the win, but then Volkov hits the ring and helps Darso double-team Duggan after the bell. And they remove the glove from him, and they use it to lay him out. And they conveniently chose that part of the clip to cut the feed, which Darso was none too happy about. But it accounts for why Duggan had to be taken out of the tournament. They used it as an angle to write him off. I did like when Darso got bent out of shape that they wouldn't show the heels beating up Duggan afterwards. He's like, well, you showed Duggan roughing me up earlier. Why can't you show us beating him down? And Watts is like, nope. Too gruesome, man. Gotta cut it. There's children watching at home. Totally not biased. So that brings us to Crusher Darso's match versus Tommy Heggie, who I believe was actually Tommy Montana, same guy we've been reviewing on world-class television with these 86 tapes. Darso's t-shirt simply read, I love Russia. Can't get any more blunt than that. May as well have just printed something on the back saying, now boo me. I'm a bad guy. So he beat on Heggie for a couple minutes and then won with a Canadian backbreaker. Really nothing else to say about it. And then coming back, they showed us highlights of last week's non-title match with Midnight Express versus Magnum TA in Wrestling 2. And Bill Watts set it up by pointing out the latest act of terrorism that the Midnights committed in their post-match angle. And of course, he's referring to the heels whipping the babyfaces with a leather belt. Personally, I would call it a little extreme to refer to a belt whipping incident as terrorism. But call me out of touch. Maybe that was considered blasphemy in the South at one point. They also showed the promo where Magnum and 2 basically vowed their revenge on the Midnights. 2 doing that awesome promo reflecting back on when Carl Krupp had tried the same thing on him in Mid-South. And 2 whipped him and peeled his skin back until he bled. And he promised the Midnights would feel the same pain. I mean, I talked about it last week, but that whole thing was so well done. Just absolutely perfect pro wrestling. But it was a good transition into Magnum and 2's match this week with Tom Lentz and Jerry Gray. As you can imagine, they're still pretty fired up after last week's showdown with the Midnights. So 2 and Magnum just went out there and beat some ass. Super aggressive. Not showing any mercy for these poor juggernauts. They probably just saw Bobby and Dennis's heads on these 2 goofballs. Ends up with Magnum getting a blind tag on 2 during the big flurry of offense. 2 cracks Tom Lentz with a running knee lift. And then Magnum hits the belly-to-belly for the 3. You know, it's funny because I said that both men were more aggressive and more agitated than normal. I was mainly referring to Magnum. I mean, Wrestling 2 is always agitated. So he honestly didn't look much different here than he normally does. And then we had more highlighted footage. And this time we're traveling to Oklahoma City to look at the most recent confrontation between Hacksaw Butch Reed and Jim the Anvil Neidhart at the Myriad Center. And it turns out, yes, they are still feuding. And things really got heated during their most recent altercation. They're in the ring slugging it out for a while. Neidhart's basically in control of the match. But as they get further along, Butch Reed cashed in on his insurance policy. Got a little bit of assistance from Crusher Darso. Darso runs down and feeds a football helmet to Reed so he can spear tackle Neidhart for the DQ. Not that Reed cared about winning the match to begin with. Now, I like seeing the footage, though, because these 2 are scheduled to face off in the opening round of the TV title tournament in a few weeks. So this is a good teaser to set up that rematch and build to their next encounter. Now, bearing in mind we saw very limited highlights here, I can't really judge one way or the other how good or bad the match was, considering Neidhart was involved. Could have gone either way. Which didn't give me much hope for this Jim Neidhart versus Larry Santana match. Surprisingly, this ended up being way more entertaining than it had any right to be. God, Neidhart just fucking wrecked this guy. I am not suggesting that the Anvil went into this taping block with a chip on his shoulder, but he sure as hell wrestled like he had shit on his mind. And I'm not just referring to the storyline stuff with Butch Reed. He just beat this guy's ass from pillar to post, flung him around like a lawn dart. At one point, He legitimately threw him from one corner of the ring post to the opposite end with a hip toss. Like a projectile missile, just heaved him across the ring. It ran through with some shoulder tackles, just did about everything but outright murdered the guy. Then he scooped him up and hit him with a fallaway slam for the pin. And this is where I wrote down, if this could have been every Jim the Anvil match for his entire career, I'd have probably had a much bigger appreciation for him growing up. I don't know where the hell this version of Neidhart's been for the last few months on Mid-South television, but I hope we see more of it. You'll hear me complain about a lot of things. The one thing you will never hear me complain about is big dudes throwing other people around like rag dolls. That'll never get old. Then we had Masayo Ito and Mike Jackson. This is where Bill Watts explained the situation with Duggan. He was originally supposed to wrestle Ito next week for the television title tournament. But since Duggan is no longer able to compete due to the injury in the coal miners match, he is now being replaced with a proper substitute. The number one standby on the Mid-South roster, Limpin' Lanny Poffo. Well, that is surely a good way to describe Lanny, isn't it? A good number one standby. The other translation is, we need fodder for Masayo Ito, so let's just serve Lanny up to him. He's got nothing going on. Another lather, rinse, repeat squash involving Ito. Couple minutes of action. Ito slaps on the illegal nerve hold, gets disqualified, refuses to break the hold, and they send referees out there to get him to break the grip. I guess the question is this. So, in storyline, is Ito aware of the fact that he can't use this hold in the tournament? At least without risking disqualification? Does he even care about winning the TV title tournament? Does he understand that he's in the TV title tournament? Says he doesn't speak a lick of English. Who's communicating all this with him? It also does make me wonder this. How did Masayo Ito get booked in a TV title tournament when every single one of his televised matches have ended via him losing by disqualification? How do you get put into a tournament with a 0-3 win-loss record? Or 0-2, whatever it was. It's just going to be hilarious if he shows up next week and intentionally gets himself disqualified to fuck himself out of $10,000. Then Limpin' Lanny has to wrestle in the next round with a broken larynx. To me, it doesn't sound like anybody wins in that scenario. But maybe that's just me. That was followed with a Terry Taylor highlight package. Kind of a mixtape feature where it's part highlight footage of Mid-South matches and the other part is a photo shoot session he apparently did as a publicity stunt for the company. I mean, the whole thing was basically done to show that, hey, not only can this boy wrestle, but damn, is he good looking. What a chick magnet. It's a pretty simple video package. Not much to it. I'm not going to suggest that Taylor was the next big USA male model or the next big thing to hit Hollywood. But hey, they're trying to market and produce him as a sex magnet. He's obviously gotten over with the people. And they're taking all the right steps to maintaining his popularity. Did a significantly better job marketing him than Vince McMahon ever did. Tell you that much. And then we went to the ring for Nikolai Volkov versus Joe Savoldi, a.k.a. political commentary featuring Bill Watts, part 52. Because you knew he would. If there's an opportunity for Watts to shoot on Russia, brother, he ain't hesitating. Sitting there talking about how he's glad the United States is one of the only places worldwide where you can passionately boo the Russian national anthem and get away with it. Talking about how you don't get to come to this country and force your ideals and morals down people's throats. You got to earn that respect. I mean, he's not wrong. We all know how much of a patriot Bill Watts is. It's just always hilarious when he breaks down into his conservative political spiels. But Volkov beat Savoldi in a few minutes and won with a backbreaker combo. And that left just enough remaining television time to fit in the first round of the TV title tournament. Is Terry Taylor squaring off with Nature Boy Buddy Landell. Pretty big high stakes for this particular opening round, considering neither of these guys have lost a match in Midsouth up to this point. And while they didn't have a ton of time to work with here, they had about as good of a sprint match as they could possibly have. This is a get your shit in match as quick as possible and make it look good. It was all action from bell to bell. Great back and forth with Buddy being the snide, cocky heel the entire time. Taylor making a short little babyface comeback and catching Landau with a flying forearm off the ropes for the surprise 1-2-3. Again, not a very long match. It was actually quite rushed. The whole thing probably went like 4.5 minutes. But they kept it moving and did the best they could with the time allotted. And this one now set up Taylor to advance to the next round in week 6 when he faces off in round 2. I mean, it was kind of disappointing that it didn't get a little more time. If they'd given it a few more minutes, it could have really been cooking there, but they had to immediately rush to the finish. But I guess that meant they wouldn't have been able to show that rock and roll promo vignette for the 18th consecutive time. Yeah, they aired that again. I think this is actually a modified, shorter version. They were actually missing the footage of them standing over the slot machine this week, so they even cut it down. But there you have it. Yeah, really not a whole lot happening this week outside the first round of the TV title tournament. And even that fell a little flat because they didn't have a whole lot of time to work with on the program. You know, if I look back at the card, I could argue they probably had a little too much going on this week. I mean, they easily could have cut a segment or two and really give that Landau-Taylor match some time to simmer. I'm not saying they needed to go an extra 10 minutes, but even an extra 5 would have been more effective. I just don't think 4.5 minutes was enough time. But time constraints aside, it was pretty much the only thing going on this week. Not a bad show. There's still plenty of good material, just a lot. And I think it maybe got a little congested in terms of the formatting this week. So I have to admit, when I saw the tagline for this week's show and the description read, "The unexpected main event of Lance Von Erich and the Iceman King Parsons versus the Freebirds," I gotta be honest, unexpected was not the word that came to mind. I would consider that more unpleasant. But hey, it's better, I guess, than doing their 487th installment of Kevin and Kerry versus the Freebirds. Lance and the Iceman is at least fresh. And we'll get to that later on. There's actually a decent handful of stuff that was going on this week. I swear to God, at this point, it has to be a direct rib on me. All these weeks I've been joking about Jack Victory being the designated prelim guy on this program. How many weeks has it been now? Is this not like the 8th consecutive taping block where they send Jack Victory out there to wrestle some ham and egger in the opener? And it just winds up being a giant 10-minute snooze fest where he barely does anything and bores the brakes off everyone. So they open with Jack Victory versus Jerry Allen. Before the bell even rang, I wanted to try and call every spot beforehand. It's usually predictable when you're talking about a Jack Victory match. As it turns out, I wasn't too far off. We had plentiful amounts of Victory stalling and playing chicken, complaining to Bronco Lubitsch about tight polling. It took them about 5 minutes to actually do anything of substance. They eventually started doing a little bit of mat wrestling where Allen was working over the arm. And then Victory turned the match around. Allen missed a running charge in the corner and fell to the floor. And from there, they basically ran out the clock to a 10-minute draw. And I went back and checked. There is no possible way this match actually went a full 10 minutes. If this thing went 8, I'd be shocked. I don't know who the timekeeper was on this match, but they dropped the ball big time there. Admittedly so, this was probably the hardest I've seen Jack Victory work in the last 7 of his 8 televised matches. I'm going to give all the credit to Jerry Allen. He put his working boots on and made this Jack Victory fella actually try for a change. If they book Jack Victory in any more TV openers, they better be matches with Jerry Allen. Elsewise, I'm going to punch a hole through my TV set. Now, from there, we came back for the one-man gang versus Mark Youngblood. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention this in the previous match, but I wanted to say it here. Bill Mercer was talking about Mike Von Erich receiving the PWI Award for Most Inspirational Superstar of the Year in 1985. And as you all know, I am one to heavily criticize the legitimacy of these dirt sheet award presentations. This is one that I would actually give a full-throttled endorsement for. I certainly am not going to deny that Mike earned that award, especially after that terrible year he went through. And he's still on the road to recovery for that. So this ended up being a pretty wacky match. It was going along relatively fine, as good as you were going to get for a fast, athletic guy working with a giant boulder. And then at some point toward the finish, as Youngblood's running wild on Gang and trying to knock him off his feet, he goes to throw a drop kick on Gang, which I think Gang was supposed to avoid by grabbing the ropes. But as Youngblood crashed and burned on the mat, the Gang also kind of just fell into the ropes and sold anyway. So he's just kind of standing over Youngblood for a minute. Time essentially freezes as he's trying to figure out what to do next. And I think Youngblood's instinctually telling him on the mat, like, dude, just hit your fucking splash and pin me. And that is exactly what Gang did. Running Warrior Splash, 1, 2, 3. This was also the match where Bill Mercer was on one of his rambling monologues. At one point, he's comparing the one-man gang to a battleship, to which he then gets into a very specific or detail-oriented conversation about the specifics of battleships and what they're designed to do. And I'm like, can somebody cut this guy's mic? I also liked how he called the finishing splash. As Gang comes down, Mercer just goes, and the one-man gang with a choom. Because that is indeed the sound you think of when a 400-pound man is about to drop all of his body weight over you. Choom. What is he, a train? I thought we were referencing battleships in this match. Come on, Bill. Get your talking points straight. All right, well, I tried to provide the redeeming quality where I could. Now, unfortunately, I have to get a little serious here. We're doing away with the comedy because we got to talk about the next segment that aired. So originally scheduled on the format, they were supposed to do a sit-down interview with Bill Mercer and Gino Hernandez. My guess is that this is intended to be a follow-up on the angle they shot in Fort Worth when Gino had thrown the bottle of hair cream in Chris Adams' eyes. So that was the plan. I don't know if they ever actually shot that interview, but it wasn't able to take place because, as we've been alluding to on this channel in the lead up to this very tragic moment in history, this was the week that Gino had unexpectedly passed away in his home in Highland Park, Texas. And while there's certainly been a lot of controversy and discussion over Gino's death in the last 30-something years, and we can talk about that in a minute here, I did want to put over the way that Bill Mercer addressed this on tape. It was eerily similar to the way he broke the news about David Von Erich's death just a couple years prior. And, while he was very professional about it then, him announcing Gino's death, especially when you consider the timing of the angle they just recently shot in Fort Worth, it was almost kind of mesmerizing when you think about the fact that he never really broke kayfabe, but he still paid homage to Gino and, tried to be cordial in the way he put him over here. And to me, that's what really stood out. I mean, this was still back during a time where kayfabe was taken very seriously. The business hadn't been entirely exposed yet. So when you're sitting there watching at home, especially if you're one of the rabid Gino Hernandez haters, you see something like this and you're like, well, that's weird. Bill Mercer's not really burying him or speaking ill of him. At the same time, he acknowledged that He may have been brash and he may have done things his way. Certainly didn't play by the rules. But the guy was a hell of a talent. And you watch something like that in hindsight, that's a pretty bold move. Again, especially right after the stuff they were doing with Gino and Chris on TV. Chris Adams may have potentially gone blind because of Gino throwing a toxic substance into his face. But then Gino unexpectedly dies and the company doesn't bury him. They're not making this a triumphant moment for all the world-class fans. They're treating it very seriously, and that's admirable. It was the closest they came to saying, let's break the fourth wall and look past the fake world of wrestling for a minute here, because this is about as real as it gets. So because of that, they just end up re-airing an old Midnight Express Fantastics match from some point last year. And as much as I love those two teams, honestly, who gives a crap? Is it even worth really discussing? Gino's death. There's been a lot that's been uncovered over the years. The story basically goes that his dead body was found, I think, by David Manning and one of the other world-class officials, because he had no-showed a couple live events and they were starting to speculate that something was wrong. And at the time, they wanted to roll it as a homicide, but I think after the autopsy studies, they ended up just rolling it a cocaine overdose. And it was something that Gino had battled on and off camera for years. Substance abuse, alcohol abuse. The company had encouraged him multiple times to get clean over the years, but it just never happened. And obviously with these kinds of cases, not all the facts are going to be distributed all at once. Over time, more details come out and people start to develop their own conspiracy theories about what really took place. And there has been a lot of speculation that Gino's death wasn't in fact a homicide, but that somebody had actually broken into his condo and murdered him. And they've looked into certain chains of events that had led up to that period. David Manning, I think, was public about how Gino was open about his life being in danger just weeks before this event. And when David had first discovered Gino's body, he noticed that the deadbolt to his condo wasn't locked, which wasn't something Gino was accustomed to doing. Now, again, depending on how fucked up he was, it's highly probable that Gino would have accidentally forgot to lock his front door. But there have also been plenty of guys in the Dallas area around that time that knew Gino was hanging around bad crowds, getting involved in drug gangs. And once you associate with those groups, if you get on somebody's bad side, it never leads to good outcomes. There's been plenty of belief over the years that it was a hit job. Even if Gino had cocaine in his system at the time of death, could somebody else have been held responsible? Yeah, it's definitely possible. I can't remember, did they do a Dark Side of the Ring series episode on Gino? I've never seen it. I don't usually care to watch those docuseries events on wrestling because so much of that information is fabricated a lot of the time. But there's a lot of weird shit that's come out on the Gino story over the years. I definitely think there's a reason to be skeptical. My issue is, why were they so quick to drop the homicide investigation? What evidence were they not able to obtain to continue pursuing the case? How long was the case in progress? A lot of weird unanswered questions all these years later. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is a sad tragedy. Yeah, how many times have I come on here and talked about what a fucking great talent Gino was, man? 29 years old. That is just unreal. In the prime of his career, one of the most charismatic natural heel personalities, great worker, great promo, had the look of a megastar. And I always think, how far could that guy have gone had he lived longer? Would he have ever gotten a fair shake in the Carolinas? Just think about all the possibilities of where Gino could have gone outside the world of world class. And now it's something we'll never know. It's been great getting a chance to go back and review all his stuff here on the channel. I've never had a bad thing to say about any of Gino's work. He was a star beacon on this program for the last few years. I just wish that momentum wasn't abruptly put to a halt. But let's keep things moving here. I guess as a way to take our minds off of Gino. They try to bring a smile to our faces by taking us down Bad Street for some Freebird music video action. And well, I said it when they aired the music video the first time around. The song never gets old. It is incredibly 1980s. And Michael Hayes' lip syncing is still atrociously terrible all these years later. But God, is it still a classic. All those 90s fans that used to say, man, remember when the NWO was the first set of cool heels in wrestling? Meanwhile, that everybody grew up watching territory wrestling is like, fuck no. The Freebirds were a million times cooler than those NWO geeks. You kidding me? You tell me with a straight face right now that Hayes, Gordy, and Roberts were less cool than Hall, Nash, and Hogan. Fuck you. More stuff that I'll debate people over until they put me in the grave. But let's talk about the main event. Michael Hayes and Buddy Roberts versus Lance Von Erich and the Iceman. Now, they said it was unexpected. Well, turns out the match was a little bit of a swerve. This was one of the most amazing opening angles I think I've ever seen in my life. Buddy Roberts gets on the house mic, and he just starts going off on the baby faces. And bear in mind, as I break this down here, Buddy Roberts was not God's gift on the microphone. Most of the time, he could barely understand a fucking word coming out of the guy's mouth. But he's just going off, talking about how he spoke with Michael Hayes beforehand. He's got an issue to settle with the Iceman personally. After all these years, he still hasn't gotten over the hair match. So Lance Von Erich can just quit the business because he's got nothing to do with this anyway. That's where I started laughing. And all the while, Hayes is playing dumb, pretending like he has no idea what's going on. You really want me to leave the ring, buddy? Yeah, that's right. Just like we talked about. And like the whole idea is he's trying to trap the Iceman in the ring so the heels can get the numbers advantage when they go to jump the baby faces. Because eventually here comes Terry Gordy, and he hits Lance from behind on the apron so that Buddy and Hayes can start double teaming the Iceman, or at least attempt to do so. And what ends up happening is Terry clocks Lance with his cowboy boot, and then Kerry runs out to try to aid the baby faces. But, Lance is a busted open mess. So David Manning takes him out, and he makes the official match with Kerry replacing Lance. And, of course, the Freebirds are all pissed off now because they thought they were going to pull a fast one. And it's great because now the heels realize that they're fucked. So as Hayes is getting thrown around and accidentally crawling over to the wrong corner for a tag, he eventually goes to tag in Buddy to save him. Now Buddy's all timid and doesn't want to get involved. So Hayes gets up and smacks him in the chest. It's just great chicken shit heel work. And so the babyfaces double team and send Hayes and Roberts into each other. We get some four-way pandemonium. Heels are in trouble. And then finally Gordy just runs back out and forces the disqualification. And then as they're going at it, Lance returns with a bandage over his head. And, well, not only do the babyfaces leave with their hands held high, David Manning also issues a $2,000 fine to the Freebirds for all the bullshittery they caused. To which I noted, isn't it great when referees actually used to have signs of authority? And they weren't just bumbling idiots with striped shirts on? Great finish of the show. Everything about that final segment was awesome. And you know, the show is kind of a tale of two tapes. Because you have to acknowledge the Gino stuff, and that was a pretty big focal point this week. With that said, the TV main event, that was a really nice send-off. I think in terms of formatting, it was well placed because it almost got people to take their minds off Gino long enough. So it may seem counterintuitive, but I'm going to give this week a World Class a thumbs up. Strictly for that main event. Because that was great. And while I know the Gino thing caught them off guard when they were putting the show together, I thought they handled it as best they could. They didn't completely neglect all the heinous stuff that Gino did in storyline, but they were sure to mention, despite what you may think of Gino personally, you can't deny he was a phenomenal talent and a hell of a superstar. And I also never really read up on how the fans responded to this when they heard the news in the Dallas area, how many people were heartbroken versus the ones that were glad to see Gino gone. Quite frankly, I just never really had an interest in reading much into it. But it does make me curious. I think, despite what you may have heard the fans react to with Gino on television, I think most of them knew the guy was an extraordinary talent, even if they may have booed him on television. But, I mean, that's neither here nor there. So I guess in the meantime, we just kind of wait for Chris to come back. And I think he's actually gone for a while, too. Because he's obviously going to sell that injury for a little bit. But I don't think he comes back until, like, late spring. It's a while. And it may have been intentionally done just to kind of give this time, or give the Gino thing some time to wear away before they brought Chris back, just because everybody was going to be reminded of it. So that may have been strategic. In any case, that's where we're at. The sinking ship just keeps getting further and further beneath the surface, dude. It's like watching the Titanic in real time. It is a slow, slow, slow fall. But on that note, we'll wrap it up there. Again, thanks everybody for stopping back to check out the FSWR channel. Make sure you tune in this coming Monday for the Retro Raw report. That's the only thing we have going on. But in the meantime, I'm slowly hoping for this hematoma recovery to follow through. Fingers crossed that hopefully I won't have to go in for surgery to get anything replaced or patched up. I feel okay. I'm just using nasal spray and trying to be overly cautious at the gym now. So we'll see how it goes. But thanks everybody for watching, and I'll catch you soon. Take care. Peace out.